Hey gang, Richard Cleveland here again from my home studio. Welcome, by the way. We are continuing on in part two. This is part two of our Man of Steel bust by U3D Print Shop. And what we're going to do today, on the last episode, we went ahead and put down our base layer, and we were using our custom-made basic flesh, which is a combination of raw sienna, burnt sienna, and white, titanium white from the Liquitex Basics line, which is this paint right here. We use this quite often. I like to use it when getting started, but today we're going to actually do something a little bit different. I've got my dry brush here. I could use a bigger dry brush, but I don't have one because I've been doing a lot of smaller scale stuff lately. I have to get a new one. So we are going to use some of our base flesh today. Normally, if I didn't have this, I would be using the beige red from Vallejo. And today I'm not going to use that, but I am going to use two other Vallejo colors to help us start to build up the highlights in the dry brushing. This is just our first dry brushing. There's going to be a lot more yet to come, so you're going to definitely want to watch out for that. So one of the other colors we're going to mix in there is light flesh, and we are going to mix some sunny skin tone in with that as well. When we get ready to, in the next episode, we're going to cover a wash, which is going to leave this kind of gray again. If that's a way of putting it. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to start dry brushing the hair. We're going to get our paint mixed up. So we'll just go to our other camera here, our top down, so you guys can see what we're doing. All right, so we've got our top down view right here. We can see I've got my paint palette. I've got the paints I'm going to use along with some of this. We're going to need some kitchen roll or some paper towel. Whichever you want to use, because dry brushing, for those who haven't done dry brushing before, I like to kind of put my paper towel underneath the edge here where you're probably not going to be able to see it very well. So it's over here. So what we're going to do with dry brushing is we will take most of the paint off that we're using. And all we're going to do is we're just going to start working on the highlights just a little bit. We're going to give them a little bit more color tonight. So we're going to use pretty much our base color because we want to start with that. So we should shake it up. Of course, we've got that ball bearing in there, so we want to shake it up. And then we will put some of that in our palette. And we've got a lot of dry brushing to do, so we are going to work with these colors quite a bit tonight. We're going to get some of that light flesh. And you can hear that ball in there. And that helps to mix up our paint. And put some of that in there. And then I will mix it up and I will have a look and just see if I need a little bit more of, whether I need a little bit more light flesh or I need a little bit more sunny skin tone or what have you. Now the sunny skin tone is quite thin, not like the light flesh, which is a little bit thicker. So we're gonna squirt some in there as well. And you'll get a feel for this as you go along. It's not really an exact science. I need a stir stick here. Do I have one from last night still? I guess I don't. So here, we'll just grab a fresh one, not a flesh one. So we're just going to take our paint and we're going to mix that up and we'll have a look at that color. And we can see that there's that pink and that sunny skin tone in there. It's bringing the color of our paint brighter. It's giving it a little bit more yellow. I think I wanted a little bit more pink than that. I think I'm going to go with something a little bit more pink than the color that I've got there. That's a little too yellow for me. If I was doing an Asian skin tone, that would be good. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, instead of adding the light flesh, I'm going to add a color called Salmon Rose. And this is a color that I use quite often if I want to just get something a little bit more pink. And this could use a little bit of Salmon Rose, so we'll drop some of that in there. You're probably saying to yourself, boy, Rich, you got a lot of paint in there. And I do. But when you're dry brushing, you're getting most of this color off your brush. And I like to do my skin tones in multiple layers, and I can build them up slowly. Now that is still a little yellow comparatively to his skin, and you can see that on camera, I think. I think that's a little too yellow. We might want to add a little bit more of our basic flesh color in there as well. There we go. There we go. Now, I don't usually like my paint this thin. That's starting to look like a better color now. There we go. I don't usually like my skin tone this thin, like when I'm dry brushing. I usually like it a little thicker, but we're not going to add any additive to this. We're just going to leave it the way that it is. That's closer. That's much closer to what I want. So when you're dry brushing, all you want to do is you want a fairly stiff brush. And this is the number 8 from Simply Simons. And again, this is from a pack of brushes I bought at Walmart. And I'm just going to dip my paintbrush in there, try and get most of it off on the palette. And then I'll just wipe it back and forth till I got most of that paint off the brush. So it's not giving me too much. And I'm just going to start to highlight. We'll start here at the top of his head. We'll just start to bring in some color. And go slow here. You don't have to go super fast. You can go slow here because this is going to make all the difference as you go ahead and build up your color. You can see here I'm just changing the color ever so slightly. Down his nose as well. And it's making it kind of look dirty, but that's all going to change when we as we get closer to the end of what we're doing. Get that nose, get those crevices and those tops. There we go. If you get a little heavy in an area, don't worry about it. You can always come back and change it later. So we'll just keep going here. And this is where you start to see some life in your print and your sculpt. When you start layering on these paints, that's when you're going to start seeing the differences and how this is going to come to life. And we'll just get some more color on there. If it's too wet, you can always put it on the edge of your skin, and that usually helps a lot. And again, we're just building up the color here. We're not trying to do a complete coverage. This is just our first sort of go around with this dry brush technique. In the next time that we meet, we're probably going to start talking a little bit more about washes, because we're going to do a wash on this next. And sometimes at this stage, I will start to have a look at where I'm going with this, because with Superman, he's a comic book character, so you don't have a lot of reference material on him. So it's pretty tough to get, you know, or find an accurate look for him, because he is, after all, an alien. Although he looks like us, he is from another planet at the end of the day. And all this is doing is now just starting to show us some of those highlights that we're going to work with. And when you're dry brushing, yeah, there's way too much paint on that still. When you're dry brushing, don't be afraid to use less, because in this stage, less is more. And this is going to look a little splotchy and blotchy at first, but as you build it up, that blotchiness is going to go away. And we just keep working around the face, on the chin. What we're trying to do is just kind of go over some of those areas that would normally be highlighted by the light. And that's kind of what we're doing now. And as we do this first sort of dry brush, you'll see that more and more. And by having a good brush that you can use as a dry brush really helps. It really, really helps. And I hope I'm keeping that in camera for you. Let's see if I can raise this light just a little bit. Maybe that's better. Yeah, that's a little better. So he may be looking a little pale at this stage. Lift up this camera a little bit as well. So there we go. He may be looking a little bit pale at this stage, but that's okay. We're going to even all of this out. And with the washes that we're going to add, it's going to change, again, the color of that skin tone. Now, with some brushes, and this one's a good example of that, you'll find that paint can get trapped in the brush really, really easy. And it can cause, you know, some issues for you with streaking and that kind of thing. But as we go through this, those streaks are all going to disappear. And we're just going to get rid of most of that paint again. Just going to keep going on Kal-El here. Kal-El is such a big model. And remember, you can't make mistakes. You can look at something and say, oh, I'm not sure about that. That doesn't look quite what I meant to do. But you can always go back and change that later. And that's the beautiful thing about painting. You're going to make this your own. There's not a lot of reference. Again, like I said, there's not a lot of reference on doing something with the Man of Steel. Because he's a fictional character. While many actors have played the Man of Steel over time, he still is a fictional character at the end of the day. And as a fictional character, it's really kind of up to you how you want to make him. If you didn't want to make him a traditional white guy, and you don't have to. You can make him whatever you want to do. I mean, you know, there's gender bending now and that sort of thing. I mean, you can do whatever you want, because at the end of the day, you're taking somebody else's creation and making it your own. And this is no different. You know, doing the Man of Steel like this is no different than you know, doing somebody else's or doing a paint job for somebody else. Now he's kind of looking a little gray there in some areas, but that's okay. Like I said, we're going to come back with a wash, and we are going to do a wash on Kal-El. So now we're going to try and get into this neck area a little bit. There's a lot of folds in this skin. So again, you're going to build this up slowly. And just light touch. You don't need a really heavy touch here. You're going to build this up. Now, I always think of Superman as somebody who's been near the sun, because he uses the sun to regenerate himself. Or, you know, our red or a yellow sun helps him to get his powers. So I'm going to show that off in his skin as we move forward with this by, you know, giving him not so much of a lighter skin tone, but something that's a little more tan, something that would have gone ahead and gotten like those sun rays and that sort of thing. So he will have a little bit of a darker skin tone when we're done. I know you're not going to see behind his ears, but you'll see why I'm doing that later on. As we work our way around, we're going to work our way around this particular model. I use this brush actually on a lot of my different projects because I really like this brush. I'd like to find a smaller one just like it, so that I could use it on my smaller models, but this one seems to work well on all the models that I do. So, and you're probably going to have to go in different directions to get, you know, the lightness that you want. I'm trying to keep this so that you guys can see it without getting my fat head in the way. And I know some people out there that have painted for a long time probably saying, wow, Rich, you're putting a lot of paint on there. And really, I'm not. Because it will lighten up as it dries, right? Or darken up as it dries, not lighten. It'll darken up as it dries. If you're like me, you end up with a lot of paint on your hand at the end of a painting session. Because I like to use the back of my hand to see how colors are shaping up. And I think we're almost there. Sometimes I will go ahead and paint the hair, start to paint the hair just to kind of give me an idea where I'm at with the paint job. And I can see when I'm looking at this particular model that, you know, there's areas that I want to make sure that I get and that I get well, because those are all going to show up later on. And yes, I know he looks a little dirty at this stage, but he really isn't. I can use a little bit more work on this side. So he's looking fairly even right now. I think I got a little bit more on his eyebrows or on his upper brow there to do. And again, you want to get most of that paint out of your brush. Before you start laying down that color. And if you mess up, hey, guess what? Go back and repaint it. I know that you're going to say to me, well, Rich, that's a lot of extra work, and sometimes it has to be. I know I've gone back and repainted because I've done something and I don't like it. You know, it didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to, so I went back and I redid it. And that's and that's how you improve too. I mean, you're always going to be looking to improve what you're doing. And this is no different. Dry brushing is also going to help you to put texture onto the skin as well. This side looks pretty good. Get around there, get around those ears a little bit. Get in the bottom, because we're going to need to get into these areas as well. There we go. That's looking way better already. And like I said, we're going to come back and we're going to work on this with a wash, and that's what I want to work on next. Painting is an art form. It really is. And like anything, you can't get better if you don't practice. And I've been practicing for many years. I took a long break from painting. When I used to paint miniatures for tabletop wargaming and painting scenery and things like that for the same type of stuff, I did that. That was my job. And as much as I enjoyed the painting aspect, it became a lot of work. But those skills have stayed with me for a long, long time. So now, you know, I can pick up something and I can start painting it right away. And I don't really have much of a problem discerning, you know, the colors that I need, because I'm pretty good now with my colors. And oh yeah, there's still a lot on there. And this is a little bit more yellow too, and I'll show you what we're going to do with that here in just a couple of minutes. Because this is now pretty much where I want it to be, I'm pretty happy with the way that looks now. I don't know how long we've been going now, but we've been going now for a little while. You know, you just take your time and you build up color slowly, and you know, you can see areas that you want to add a little bit more color. And you'll notice that when you look at a person's skin, and I talked about this a little bit on the last episode, that skin is not perfectly smooth. And by going in and doing what we're doing today with the dry brushing and, you know, kind of getting down that foundation, you can see that we've got some light color in here. We've got some dark color in here. That's a big part of it. And we're going to finish this off before we start getting into more of that skin tone color that we want by adding a wash. And we're going to do the wash tonight. I was going to do it tomorrow, but I think I'm going to do it tonight. And again, with these colors, it's going to be experimentation. And that's a big part of what we do is experimentation. So now I'm going to leave that the way I have it, I'm going to make up a wash. I'm going to use my brown side here. And what I'm going to use for this is mahogany brown. And where is that? I think I'm going to use red leather. I like this red leather color. You see there's a little dark and a little red. So I'm going to shake these two up. Now when I do a wash, I really go ahead and thin that down. I want it as thin as possible. Once I put the wash on here, you guys will see a huge difference. It's almost gonna make the color that we put on look like it's not even there. And I will put that down a fair amount. And do I want red brown or do I want brown sand? I think I want the red brown. I think I'm going to use the red brown here. I'll put some of that in there. Yeah, that'll give me more of the leather look that I'm looking for, I think. And I'll just use my stick and I'll mix those two together and I'll see what it looks like. So it's got a little bit of red, like almost a dark terracotta. And that's what I'm looking for. And now I'm going to go ahead and add some water to that. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday too, where I don't use like straight water. I mix sort of an airbrush thinner, and this stuff here is 50-50 water and alcohol with a few drops of that flow adhesive in it. And I'm going to really thin this out. You see there's a lot of water in there. I want this really thin. And I'll show you what I mean here in just a second. Now I could go ahead and use this brush, but I'm not going to. I'm going to just set that over there. I'm going to mix this up again so it's nice and thin. And that's what I'm looking for. I like the thinness there. If I go ahead and grab this brush here, this is number 5. You can see it's more like a powder puff. And I can go over to my skin texture and I can see how that's going to look. That looks like it's going to go on quite dark, but that's okay. There's a lot of pigment in there. I could actually thin it a little bit more, actually. Now I'm going to do an overall wash here. So you're going to see, now that's better. Yeah, that looks better. I can tell, you'll be able to tell over time what looks good and what doesn't look good. Now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to just put all of this wash on, and we're going to let it sit. We're going to let it pool in areas, and you're going, wow, you just covered up all that work that you did. And to a certain degree, you're absolutely right. We did cover up all that work that we did. But you'll see why in the next episode, the next time we get together, why this is important. Because now this is going to even out this dry brushing that we did. And it's going to allow us to get the color that we're after, because we want Kal-El here to be a little bit suntanned. He is an alien after all, and he uses the sun. So we're just filling in all of that. Now, you'll notice that sometimes you'll get bubbles. If you get bubbles, just go back over them. That means you have a little bit too much of that flow enhancer in there. You can bring in another brush and that'll help too sometimes. I Find the more material you put on, the more air that gets trapped in your brush, the more bubbles will form. And that's just because of the soapiness of that additive that we use. That's part of what that is all about. And we'll get up and underneath that hair curl. Again, a light touch helps to keep those bubbles down. And normally I would go back and wipe some of this off, but because this is our first layer that we're doing, I'm not going to, because this is building up our foundation underneath the skin for Kal-El here. And it'll run on you, and it'll try and get away from you, and that's okay. The more water that you add, the more capillary the action becomes. You want to try and keep it moving so that you don't get a dry edge, because you can certainly get a dry edge on this, and then that'll show up in your paint job, and you don't really want that. There we go. Get rid of that dry edge. There we go. Get rid of some of those spots on his nose. There we go. What we're trying to do is get this into all the crevices around the model. Sometimes I'll use a flat brush. I really like this brush though. It really works well. Get up in his nose there and in the center, around there, and around those eyes. Around here. Trying to get this to flow into all of the darker areas that we want. The reason I like this red, this more reddish look to the skin, is because it gives me a nice foundation for all of those deeper crevices on his face and in his neck and all around. So I'm just going to really inspect this model really quickly, and then I am going to I'm just kind of going around and popping bubbles at this stage. All right. So if you see it pooled too much in one area, you can come along and just kind of pop that out of there. Did we do the inside of this here? No, we didn't. Grab a little bit of that water, that muddy water. Well, we missed the whole backside of his head. So we'll get in here, get around his neck, get inside that ear canal. Because again, that's going to be a spot that light doesn't hit very often. Now we can see that he's kind of drying up now. He's starting to dry, and we're just going to go ahead and help that along. And I'll show you a little trick that I do to kind of help me along with some of this type of work. Make sure we got underneath his chin and in some of those darker areas. Is I will take my hair dryer, just like this, and I'll turn it on, and I'll Just go over it. If I see little bubbles, this is a chance for me to break them up. And if you come across an area that looks streaky, don't be afraid to take a little bit of that color that you were using and go back in there and just clean it up. Again, that's all going to go away, but as we build up our color, again, this is just the foundation. We're not really doing much to change the foundation of what we're doing. We're just getting a nice foundation of color on there. And try and even out that nose a little bit. There we go. There we go. I want to really get into those lines because remember, we're aging this Kal-El a little bit. We're not giving him a completely smooth young man's skin texture. We're going to age him a little bit. So he represents more of that kingdom come. So now he looks pretty dark again, but that's okay because we're going to take this brush, we're going to put it back in there. And before we go any further, I want to seal this because I like the color that I've got on there now and I want to seal it. So I'm going to grab some of that sealer that we talked about yesterday, the Krylon Matte, low odor. Give it a good shake. And now we'll just go ahead and spray this. And if you get big chunks on there because you're just kind of work it in and bust all those little bubbles if you can. All we're doing is, like I said, we're just protecting this layer of color. And now we'll leave that till the next time, and that color will be protected. And again, we could go ahead and speed up the drying time on that by taking the hairbrush to it, or the hair dryer to it, but we don't really need to. Because this is an acrylic sealer, and that's why I like that stuff, because it is an acrylic sealer. Now I'm just going along and I'm just popping some of those bubbles that were in there. All right, so that kind of brings us to the end. All right, so that kind of brings us to the end of our job tonight. We did a little bit of dry brushing, brought out some of those areas. We did up a wash tonight, and we applied the wash a little heavy, That's okay, it doesn't matter because all of that's going to get covered up. Remember, we're layering color to give him a more realistic skin tone. And it's so much easier to do when you do it like this. You can really work the brushes, and we'll talk more about that on the next episode. We're going to talk a little bit more about brushes and a little bit more about cleaning. I will put him over here so I don't bump him. And you're going to end up with paint on your hands like I do all the time. Don't worry about it. And again, you can't do anything wrong. If you mess up, that's okay. Go back, just repaint it, and then you can move forward from there. And that's just part of the game. So until next time, I do appreciate you showing up for our Patreon. Thank you to all of our Patreons on this series of painting, and we're going to keep going. And this should be, I'm going to think this is going to be about 20 episodes long, because the most detail that we're going to do is in the face and the skin texture and in the hair. The cape is relatively easy, and the clothing and symbol are relatively easy. Then we're probably going to spend another 8 to 10 hours on the base, because we're going to be doing a lot of metallics on the base. And this particular model really kind of gives us a really broad scale of the different things that you can do with your models. And we're going to continue on, and we're just going to do, after this one, we'll do another model, and we'll see what that model is going to be as we get closer to the end of this one. So until next time, my friends, remember that the first layer is always your foundation to a great print. Thank you for coming and joining me tonight, and we'll see you next time.